Footsteps in the storm. The wind screamed like a wild animal. Snow flew across the empty land thick and fast, covering everything in white. The sky was dark, and the sun had disappeared behind gray clouds. The ice storm had come suddenly. Trees bent, rocks vanished, and in the middle of it all, a shape moved. It was her. An alien mother, small and weak, was walking slowly, almost crawling. Her thin body was shaking. Her arms were wrapped tightly around a small bundle. Her child. His tiny face was turning blue, his eyes closed. He was not crying anymore. He was too cold to cry. Her skin, once shining and smooth, was now dry and cracked. Her feet bled as she dragged herself forward, looking for anything at all. A cave, a crack in the rocks, a place to hide. But the storm showed no mercy. She fell again. The snow burned her like fire. Her arms tightened around her child. "Please," she whispered, "just a little longer, please hold on." But deep inside she knew. No one would come. Her people had turned their backs. They called her child a mistake, a weakling, a waste of food. Her mate had left first, then her village. They said she was cursed. No one wanted to help her. No one had ever helped her. The storm grew louder. Her eyes began to close, and then she heard it. Footsteps, heavy, crunching in the snow, slow, but real. She opened her eyes and turned her head weakly. Her vision was blurry, full of white shapes, but one shape was different. Tall, moving toward her. Not animal, not alien, human. He wore a thick coat and snow goggles. His face was hidden behind a scarf, but she saw his eyes. He knelt beside her without fear. His hands, covered in gloves, touched her gently. She flinched. She thought he would take the child away. Instead, he lifted both of them. She wanted to scream, to fight, but her body was too cold, too tired. She blacked out. When she woke up, she was warm. A small shelter had been built inside a rocky hole. A fire crackled nearby. Thick blankets covered her and the child. Her eyes widened as she looked around. The child. He was next to her, still alive. His skin had color again. His little chest moved up and down, and the human. He was there, sitting near the fire, rubbing his hands. Watching them quietly, she sat up fast. "Don't touch him," she cried weakly. The human didn't move. He slowly lifted both hands to show he meant no harm. "I won't," he said softly. "He's safe." She stared at him. His voice was deep but calm, not angry, not cruel. She looked at her child again. He was breathing, alive. She couldn't understand it. "No one helps us," she said in her own tongue, not expecting him to understand. "Why would you?" The human didn't reply. Maybe he didn't understand her language, or maybe he just didn't need to say anything. He stood and picked up a small box. He opened it and pulled out something. Food. He placed the food gently beside her, then water. He didn't force her to eat. He didn't touch her again. He just stepped back and sat near the fire. The alien woman looked at the food, then back at her child. Her lips trembled. Her stomach was empty, but her heart was full of confusion. In her world, kindness had a price. Help always came with pain, and yet, this human said nothing, took nothing. She picked up the food slowly. Her hands shook. She took a bite. Warmth filled her mouth. Real food. Tears ran down her cheeks. The human looked up and saw her crying. He didn't speak. He only gave a small nod and looked back at the fire. For the first time in her life, someone had helped her without asking for anything, and she didn't even know his name. But she would never forget those footsteps in the storm. The alien woman sat frozen, not from the cold anymore, but from fear. The fire in the small shelter crackled softly, casting warm light on the walls, but she didn't relax. Her arms stayed wrapped tightly around her sleeping child. Her body stayed curled, ready to flee. In her world, no one gave without taking. No one helped without hurting later. She kept waiting for the human's real nature to show, for him to yell, demand, or worse. But nothing happened. The man simply stirred the fire with a stick, then placed another log inside. Then, without a word, he turned to a small metal box and pulled out 2 gray packets. He tore one open and poured warm liquid into a cup. Then he opened the second one and set it beside her. It smelled like soup, real, rich soup. Her mouth watered, but she didn't move. Her eyes flicked between the food and the man. Slowly, the human spoke. "Eat," he said, pointing at the bowl, then tapping his chest. "Safe." His voice was calm, deep, and not sharp like the voices of her people. Her people had shouted at her. This human was different. Still, she didn't touch the soup. She had been tricked before. She remembered the time an alien trader had offered her help, only to sell her clothes for a profit and leave her naked in the street with her child crying in the cold. She wouldn't fall for that again. But the child beside her whimpered softly, his face twitching from hunger even in sleep. Her heart broke. With shaking fingers, she reached out and picked up the cup. The human didn't move. She sniffed it. Warm. Real. She sipped, then took a bigger sip, then swallowed the rest. It burned a little going down, but it felt like life. Her body, weak for days, finally felt a little strength return. The man didn't cheer. He didn't smile. He just nodded once, then leaned back and closed his eyes. She watched him silently for a while. He wasn't armed. Not that she could see. No knife, no weapon on his belt. And still he had come into a storm to help her. She could barely believe it. The fire made her feel safe, but her heart still whispered fear. What did he want? Why was he being kind? No one was kind without a reason. She tightened her arms around her child again, her eyes never leaving the human. Hours passed. The storm outside still howled, but not as strong. Her child stirred again. His eyes opened, glassy but alive. He coughed weakly. She gasped and held him close, crying softly into his hair. The human opened his eyes, watching. Then he pulled another small blanket from his pack and crawled forward, slow and careful like approaching a wild animal. He set the blanket gently over the boy and pulled back without a word. "Why?" she asked suddenly in a whisper. He looked at her. She tapped her chest. "Why help me? Why help him?" The man stared at her, then looked at the child. He took off one glove and pointed to an old scar on his arm. Then, with 2 fingers, he mimed a small shape. Someone small. A child. She didn't understand fully, but she saw pain in his eyes. She saw truth. This man had lost someone. He saw her weakness and remembered his own. Her lip trembled. She looked away. "No one has ever helped us," she whispered. "We were thrown away. Like nothing." The man didn't speak. Instead, he reached into his pack and pulled out a square silver case. Inside were 3 protein bars. He gave one to her. One he placed beside the child. The last, he kept. She stared at it. She had never seen someone share evenly with her. Not once. She took the bar. "Thank you," she said quietly, unsure if he'd understand. He nodded again. Later that night, while the wind still cried outside, the fire grew low. The human stood and checked the door, making sure it was shut tight. Then he sat near it, not by the fire, and crossed his arms to sleep. The alien woman blinked. He wasn't even trying to get close to her. She had feared he might demand something once night came. But instead, he was guarding her, keeping watch. Her arms relaxed a little. Her child slept deeply now, breathing stronger. She pulled the blanket tighter and looked at the man once more. Maybe he was different. Maybe humans were different. Maybe For the first time in her life, she wasn't completely alone, and as her eyes finally closed, she realized something. Even stranger, she wasn't afraid anymore. The silence inside the shelter was soft, broken only by the sound of slow, shallow breathing. The alien woman opened her eyes in the faint firelight, unsure how long she had slept. For a moment she panicked, but then she felt the gentle rise and fall of her child's small chest against her arm. He was still breathing. She leaned over him, touched his forehead, and gasped quietly. His skin wasn't cold anymore. It was warm and alive. She placed her ear close to his lips and waited. A soft breath brushed against her cheek. Her chest shook as tears filled her eyes. She had thought he would die. Out there in the storm, she had already whispered goodbye in her heart. Now he was here, safe, breathing, because of the human. She looked over at the man who was still sitting near the entrance of the shelter, his back against the wall, his eyes half closed. He didn't seem to have slept much. His coat was pulled tighter around him and his breath was fogging slightly in the cold air. He had given her and the child the warmest spot by the fire. He had taken the cold for himself. She didn't understand. This man. No alien she had ever known would do such a thing. Not even her own mate had shown such care. The human noticed her gaze and gave a tired but soft nod, like he was checking if they were all right. She nodded slowly back. Her hands moved, carefully under the blankets. She pulled the protein bar he had left for the child and gently broke a small piece. Then she touched the child's lips. "Wake up, little star," she whispered in her language. "Taste this. Just a little." The child stirred, his eyelids fluttering. He turned his head slightly, then opened his mouth a tiny bit. The piece of food touched his tongue. A moment later, he made a faint sound and chewed weakly. The mother covered her mouth with one hand as joy rose inside her like a flood. He was eating. She looked up at the human again. "He's alive," she whispered, not knowing if the man could understand. But the human smiled faintly. He understood. For a long time, the mother sat holding her child, feeding him tiny pieces. He didn't speak yet, but his eyes opened, and he looked around. He saw the human and clung to his mother. She whispered soft words in his ear, telling him that the stranger wasn't bad, that he saved them, that he brought fire when they had only known cold. The child blinked, then looked back at the man with shy curiosity. Later, the human got up and stretched slowly. He winced a little, his muscles stiff from cold and poor sleep. He picked up a metal canister, opened it, and poured warm water into a small bowl. He added a few green tablets. The water bubbled lightly. He stirred it, then handed it to the woman. She accepted it with both hands, sniffing the strange smell. It was a kind of herbal drink, warm and calming. She took a small sip and felt its heat spread through her body. It made her feel strong. Not much, but just enough. She looked at him carefully. His clothes were thick, but not new. Worn patches marked the elbows and knees. His boots were scratched and tired. This human was not rich. He was not someone with power or luxury. And yet, he had risked his own safety to save two strangers in a storm. She couldn't understand it. Where had he come from? Why had he helped them? Her people had always warned her about outsiders, especially humans. They said humans were dangerous, selfish and cold-hearted. But now here was this man sitting quietly near the fire, not asking for anything, not touching her or her child, not even demanding a thank you, just being there, just protecting them. The child coughed again, but it wasn't weak this time, it was stronger. His eyes looked brighter now and his little hands moved under the blanket. The mother kissed his forehead and let out a long breath. She had been holding that breath for days, maybe weeks. Her heart was still wounded from all she had lost. But now there was something new. A feeling she had never allowed herself to have. Hope. The human stood and stepped outside the shelter for a moment. Snow blew in with him when he returned, but it wasn't as heavy as before. The worst of the storm was over. He looked at the sky, then back at her, and held up 2 fingers. 2 hours, he said. Then he pointed toward the hills. Safer place. She didn't understand all the words, but she understood the meaning. He wanted to move them when it was safe. He was still helping. She looked down at her son and gently touched his cheek. He was alive. She looked up at the man again. He had given her back something she thought was lost forever. Tomorrow, she would follow him, because today, her child had breathed again. The fire had burned low, but the warmth remained inside the small rocky shelter. Outside, the storm had slowed. The wind still whispered across the frozen hills, but the worst had passed. Inside, the alien woman sat with her child sleeping safely in her lap. His small hand clutched a corner of her tunic, and his soft breathing filled the quiet. She stared into the last flickers of the fire, lost in her thoughts, while the human checked his gear. He moved carefully, preparing supplies, folding blankets, and packing what little food was left. He didn't ask questions, he didn't speak unless needed, and yet something in his silence made her want to speak. Maybe it was the way he treated them, not as burdens, not as worthless. Maybe it was the way he gave them warmth before he took any himself. Or maybe, after all this time, she had finally found someone who might actually listen. She cleared her throat softly, and the human looked up. "Do you know what they called us?" she asked in a quiet voice, not even sure if he could understand. "They called us the Cursed Ones." Her eyes didn't meet his. Instead, they stayed on the sleeping child. "My son. He was born small. Small, too quiet. They said he was broken, and if he was broken, then so was I." The words came slowly, like old wounds tearing open again. "His father left us after the first week, said he didn't want to raise a useless thing. The others, they just stopped coming by. Stopped speaking to me. No help. No food. No fire. They made me invisible." The human didn't interrupt. He simply watched her with quiet eyes, his hands resting on his knees. His presence felt steady, not judging. "I tried to make it work," she continued, her voice harder now. "I begged. I cried. I offered to clean their homes, carry their water, do anything. But they saw me as a shame to the village. A reminder of weakness. I was nothing to them." She paused and touched her son's face. "And he was innocent. He never asked to be born. But they blamed him too." She looked up finally, her eyes meeting the man's. "Have you ever seen someone turn their back while your child cries from hunger? Have you ever watched people eat while pretending not to hear your voice?" Her voice cracked at the edges. "I have." The human leaned forward a little, and for the first time he spoke softly. "I lost someone," he said. "A sister. She died during a storm. I was just a boy. Couldn't save her." His words were simple, but they carried weight, heavy and true. The woman didn't respond right away, but something inside her shifted. For a moment, their pain seemed to connect, reaching across 2 different worlds. "She used to sing," he added almost in a whisper. "Just like your boy hummed last night." The mother's lips parted. She hadn't even noticed her son humming. He must have felt safe, safe enough to hum in his sleep, safe enough to sound like a child again. A child who'd known nothing but cold and hunger. "I didn't think we'd survive," she admitted. "When I left the village, I thought maybe we'd die quietly in the snow, but I couldn't wait for them to bury him. I had to try." Her fingers brushed the side of her boy's face gently. "Even if I failed." The human opened his pack and took out a soft cloth. He passed it to her. She hesitated, then took it. "Thank you," she said, wiping her cheeks. "You don't even know our names, but you helped us. No one else ever did that." He gave a tired smile. "Don't need a name to help someone." For the first time, She felt a strange warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. It was the feeling of being heard, of being seen. The human stood and walked toward the shelter's entrance. He checked the skies again. "Still stormy," he said. "But we can move soon. Safer place west." She stood too, slowly, and pulled her child close. "We'll follow you," she said. "Wherever you go." He nodded, not surprised. She looked, out past him, into the icy hills. Her village lay somewhere behind those frozen mountains, a place that had turned her away, a place that never saw her son as someone worth saving. And now, in this shelter far from the cold hearts of her people, a stranger had brought them back to life. She didn't understand everything about humans, but she knew one thing now. Compassion wasn't weakness, it was strength. The wind had calmed, but the silence that followed was heavier than the storm. The human checked the sky once more. Thin clouds still covered the sun, but now the snow had slowed to a soft, quiet drift. The alien mother wrapped her child tightly and followed the man's lead as they stepped outside the rocky shelter. The air was freezing, sharp as knives against her skin, but she no longer cared. Her child was alive. The human had saved them, and now she trusted him enough to walk beside him into the unknown. They moved slowly, step by step, over frozen hills and sharp rocks. The human helped her when she slipped. He carried her child when her arms became too tired. Every time she looked at him, she saw something her people had lost, kindness without cost. But the snow was not the only thing watching them. From the edge of a high cliff, something moved. It watched with narrow eyes, covered in fur as white as the snow. 4 legs. Teeth like broken glass. A predator made for ice. It had smelled fire the night before. Now it smelled blood, sweat, warmth, and weakness. It was not alone. Another shape crept beside it, then another. 3 ice beasts, large and silent, began to move through the snow, following the scent of life. Hunger drove them. Cold made them fast. The human paused as they neared the edge of a narrow pass between 2 cliffs. He held out his hand, signaling the woman to stop. She froze, hugging her child closer. "What is it?" she whispered. He didn't answer with words. His eyes scanned the snow, slow and careful. His breath came in slow clouds. Something wasn't right. He knelt and touched the snow. Then he looked up sharply. Tracks, big ones, fresh. He turned quickly, reaching for the bundle strapped across his back. He pulled out a short black weapon, primitive by alien standards but deadly in human hands. The alien woman's eyes widened. "What is it?" she asked again, now afraid. "What's wrong?" The human didn't explain. He simply pointed toward the rocks. "Hide," he said firmly. "Now." She obeyed without question, ducking behind a frozen ridge and curling around her child again. Her heart pounded. She had never heard the man's voice so sharp before. He stood in the open, weapon raised, body still. The snow was quiet, too quiet. Then, a low growl shattered the silence. The first beast lunged from behind a snowbank, huge, fast, and snarling. The human moved quickly, firing once. The shot lit the air with a sharp flash. The creature howled, skidding in the snow, wounded but not dead. 2 more beasts appeared, circling fast, their eyes glowing with cold hunger. The human didn't retreat. He stepped forward. Another shot. Another beast dropped, crying out in pain before falling still. The last one came from the side, faster than the others. The human turned too late. Claws tore across his shoulder, dragging him down into the snow. Blood stained the white ground. The alien mother screamed. She couldn't stay hidden. She rushed out with her child in her arms, eyes wide with terror. "No, no, please." The man struggled, holding the beast's jaws back with both hands. Its teeth snapped inches from his face. His weapon had fallen. His arm bled badly. But his eyes locked with hers for only a second. And in that second, he didn't look afraid. He looked angry. He head-butted the beast hard, dazing it for a split moment. Then he reached for the knife strapped to his leg. With one sharp thrust, he drove it into the beast's neck. The creature gave a final roar before falling over, motionless. The snow went quiet again. She ran to him, falling to her knees. "You're bleeding," she cried. "You're hurt." Her hands hovered uselessly over the torn coat and red shoulder. The human coughed, shaking his head. "I'm fine," he muttered, though pain was clear in his voice. "Check your boy." She turned quickly and saw her son still clutched in her arms, scared but safe. She looked back at the man, her hands pressing on his wound to stop the bleeding. "Why didn't you run?" she whispered. "You could have left us." He gave a weak smile. "Not my way." Tears streamed down her cheeks. No one had ever fought for her. No one had ever bled for her. But this human, this stranger, had just risked his life for a woman and child he didn't even know. And now, she understood. This man wasn't just brave. He was something her world had forgotten. He was good. Blood soaked through the human's coat, turning the white snow beneath him into patches of red. His breaths came hard and fast, his jaw clenched against the pain. The alien woman pressed both hands against his shoulder, trying to stop the bleeding. Her hands were trembling. She had never touched a human before, not like this. And never one who had bled for her. Around them, the bodies of the 3 ice beasts lay still. The cold wind moved softly again, as if the land itself was stunned into silence. Her son stood a few feet away, hugging his mother's bag, watching the man with wide, frightened eyes. He had seen the whole fight. He had seen someone defend them without asking for anything. The woman didn't know what to do. She had no training, no medicine. All she had were strips of cloth, old instincts, and a desperate heart. She tore a piece from the bottom of her tunic and tied it around the human's shoulder. "Stay awake," she whispered, panic in her voice. "Don't sleep now." But the man only smiled faintly. "I've had worse," he said weakly, though his skin had turned pale and his eyes heavy. "It's just a scratch." She let out a breath between a laugh and a sob. "Liar," she whispered. "You're bleeding like you fought death itself." "I think I did," he muttered. The woman worked as quickly as she could. Her hands were clumsy, but the pressure stopped the worst of the bleeding. The human winced but didn't pull away. "We need shelter," she said. "You can't walk far." He opened his eyes slowly and nodded toward the east. "Cave, 2 hills down," he said. "Marked it yesterday. Safer." She looked toward the hills, unsure, but then she saw the beasts again. Their eyes frozen open, their jaws cracked from the battle. He had protected them. The least she could do was carry him to safety now. She stood, lifted her child onto her back, and returned to the human. "Lean on me," she said firmly. "You saved us. Let me do something now." It took time. Every step was slow, every breath painful. The man tried to walk on his own, but his legs were unsteady. She held him tightly, guiding him with strength she didn't know she had. Her child said nothing the whole time. He watched, holding onto her scarf from behind, quiet but strong. Together they reached the cave just before nightfall. The entrance was small, hidden between 2 rocks, but inside was space, dry ground, and some wood the human had gathered earlier. She helped him sit against the wall and started a small fire, copying what she had seen him do the day before. Her fingers struggled with the strange tools, but she managed. When the flames finally rose, she sat beside him and checked the wound again. It was bad, but not deadly. Not yet. She used melted snow to clean it, wincing every time he did. "You should have run," she whispered again. "Why didn't you just run?" He opened one eye. "Would you have?" he asked. She shook her head. "Then why expect me to?" She had no answer. She looked at her son, who was now curled beside the human, his tiny body wrapped in a blanket. He had placed one hand gently on the man's knee, as if to say thank you, in his own small way. They didn't sleep much that night. She stayed awake, feeding the fire, checking the wound, watching the snow at the entrance. She listened to every sound, but no more beasts came. No more wind howled. The danger had passed. Morning came slowly. The cave grew brighter with pale sunlight. The man stirred and opened his eyes. "Still here," he said. "You sound surprised," she replied softly. "I thought maybe you'd leave me behind." "Never." He looked at her, and for a moment they didn't speak. Then he said, "Most people run when things get hard." She nodded. "Mine did." "But you didn't," he said. She looked down. "I couldn't. Not with him," she said, gesturing toward her son. "He's all I have." The human gave a slow nod. "Then I guess we're the same." She blinked. "How?" "I lost my sister, all I had. So now I help others when I can." It's what she would have wanted. His voice was quiet but steady. "I couldn't save her, but I saved you." The fire cracked gently beside them. She looked at him again, really looked, and for the first time in her life, she saw a male not as someone to fear, but as someone who would stand between her and death. He had no reason to help, no reward to earn, yet he had fought for her like she was family. And now, sitting beside him, she felt something stronger than fear. She felt safe. Morning sunlight touched the mouth of the cave like a soft promise. The storm had passed. The snow outside still covered the land like a blanket, but the sky was now calm, pale blue, with no clouds left to hide the light. Inside the cave, the fire had turned to warm embers. The alien woman sat beside the human who was finally sleeping peacefully, his face less pale than before. Her child lay curled beside him, his tiny hand resting gently on the man's chest, rising and falling. With every slow breath, she watched them in silence, her heart so full it hurt. It was the first time in many cold nights that she felt her chest rise without fear. She didn't know what came next. She had no plan, no place to go. Her village would never take her back. They would still call her cursed, still pretend her son didn't exist. But now she had something different. She had someone who had seen her pain and not turned away. Someone who had bled for her, fought for her, carried her child when she couldn't. He hadn't asked her name. He hadn't cared what others said about her. To him, she had been a mother in need, and that was enough. When the man woke, his eyes blinked slowly. He looked around, confused at first, then smiled when he saw her. "You're still here," he said, voice rough but steady. She smiled back. "I told you I wouldn't leave." He struggled to sit up, but she gently pressed his shoulder. "Not yet. You need rest." He grinned faintly. "Yes, ma'am." Then he looked at the child. "He slept well?" She nodded. "He feels safe." "Good," he said. "That's all that matters." She hesitated. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap. Then she spoke, her voice trembling. "No one has ever made us feel safe before. Not once. I didn't know what it felt like, and not until now." The human looked at her seriously. "Everyone deserves to feel safe." She looked away. "My kind doesn't believe that. They only help the strong. If you're weak, you're forgotten." "Then, they're wrong," he said without anger. Just truth. They stayed in the cave for 2 more days. The human's wound slowly closed. She cleaned it every morning, boiled water like he showed her, and fed him from the little food left. He taught her how to read the map on his screen, how to use the heat packs, how to check the air quality. Her hands learned quickly. Every night, she sat close by the fire, listening to the soft rhythm of the man's breath and the gentle heartbeat of her child. And one night when the fire burned low and the stars shone outside the cave mouth, she whispered, "Do humans always help strangers? Like this?" The man smiled without opening his eyes. "Not always," he said, "but some do." "Why?" "Because sometimes you're the only one who can." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "You gave us a place to sleep. You gave us food, warmth, life." She looked at him closely. I don't know what I can give you in return. He opened his eyes and looked at her. You don't need to give me anything. But I want to, she whispered. He thought for a while. Then give him a better life, he said, pointing gently toward the child. That's enough for me. Tears touched her eyes. You already gave him a better life. They left the cave the next morning. The snow was thinner now. The air was crisp, but the wind no longer cut like a blade. The human walked slowly, still weak but steady enough. The woman stayed close beside him, carrying her child on her back, one hand always ready to support the man if he stumbled. Together, they reached a nearby human outpost by evening. Lights blinked. Warm walls stood against the wind. And humans, real humans, opened the door to them without question. They treated her wound. They welcomed her son. And when they saw the man beside her, they didn't question why he brought an alien woman and child to their camp. They only asked if she needed a bed. And for the first time, she said yes. Later that night, lying on a real mattress, with her son asleep on one side and a warm blanket over her shoulders, she closed her eyes slowly. Outside the window, snow still fell, but gently now, calm, not cruel. The door opened quietly. The human stepped in, his arm in a sling, a soft smile on his face. She looked at him from the bed. Will you stay? She asked. He nodded. If you want me to. I do, she whispered. And in that small, warm room, she finally understood what safety meant. Not walls, not heat, not silence. It was someone who didn't leave when things got hard. It was him. And for the first time in her life, she fell asleep knowing she would never be alone again.